You ever see someone get stopped and realize too late they stopped the wrong person? The red and blue lights washed over the quiet street as Officer Ryan Mitchell stepped out of his cruiser, his boots hitting the pavement with authority, his eyes already locked onto the woman standing beside a silver sedan parked along the curb. Danielle Carter didn't move, didn't fidget, didn't even glance around like most people did when a patrol car lit them up. She just stood there, hands relaxed at her sides, her expression calm in a way that didn't fit the moment. Mitchell approached with a tight jaw and a voice sharpened by habit. "License and registration," he said, not a request, a command, and when she reached slowly into her bag, he added, "Make it quick." His tone laced with impatience, the kind that came from years of assuming control before understanding the situation. A small crowd had already begun to form across the street, drawn by the flashing lights, phones lifting quietly, capturing every second. Danielle handed over her ID without a word, her fingers steady, her breathing even. Mitchell glanced at it for barely a second before scoffing under his breath. "Step out of the vehicle," he said, and when she did, the evening air felt heavier, like something unseen had just shifted. "Turn around," he continued, reaching for his cuffs, and still she didn't resist, didn't question, didn't react the way people usually did. Instead, she looked straight ahead, eyes focused on something far beyond him, something he couldn't see, couldn't understand. The metal clicked around her wrists, firm but controlled, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the quiet block. A passing car slowed. Someone whispered. Someone else kept recording, but Danielle remained still, composed, almost prepared. Mitchell leaned closer, his voice lower now, edged with something colder. "You people always think you can just stand wherever you want," he muttered, more to himself than to her, but she heard it. And for the first time, she spoke, her voice calm, almost quiet enough to miss. "You just made a mistake." Mitchell paused for half a second, just enough for something unfamiliar to flicker behind his eyes. Then he tightened his grip slightly, dismissing it. "Yeah? We'll see about that," he replied. But the air had already changed. A low engine hum rolled in behind them, subtle but present. A black SUV easing to a stop at the edge of the scene, its windows dark, its presence unnoticed by most, except her. Danielle's gaze shifted just slightly, not enough for anyone else to catch, but enough to tell. She wasn't surprised, she wasn't afraid, she was waiting. And somewhere between the flashing lights, the quiet crowd, and the steady rhythm of her breathing, the balance of power had already begun to move. Mitchell just didn't know it yet. The engine of the black SUV idled low, almost blending into the distant hum of evening traffic. But it was there, steady, deliberate, like a heartbeat beneath the surface, and Danielle Carter felt it without turning her head, without shifting her stance, as if she had been expecting that exact sound at that exact moment. Officer Ryan Mitchell did not notice it yet, his focus locked on procedure, on control, on the small illusion of authority he believed he still held. He adjusted his grip on her arm and glanced down at his radio, the static crackling faintly before going silent again. "Dispatch, I have one detained for further questioning," he said, his voice firm. But there was a slight hesitation at the end of the sentence, something subtle, something even he did not fully register. Danielle stood still, the cool metal around her wrists catching the glow of the cruiser lights, her breathing slow, measured, almost too controlled for someone in her position. And if you had been standing there, close enough to hear it, you would have realized something did not add up. Most people fill silence with words, with panic, with explanation. But she offered nothing, not even a glance in his direction, and that silence began to stretch, to press against the edges of the moment until it became something heavier, something noticeable. Mitchell shifted slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied her profile. "You always this quiet?" he asked, attempting to reclaim the upper ground. But the question landed flat, unanswered. Because she was not playing his game. She was not reacting. And that was the first crack, small but real, in the structure he thought he controlled. Across the street, the small crowd leaned in closer, phones still raised, capturing every second, whispers moving between them like a current, while the SUV behind them remained still, its tinted windows reflecting the flashing lights and muted pulses. One of the rear doors unlocked with a soft click that barely registered in the noise of the scene. But Danielle heard it. And for the briefest second, her eyes shifted, not in fear, not in urgency, but in quiet acknowledgement, like a signal received. Mitchell followed her gaze instinctively, his head turning just enough to notice the vehicle for the first time, his posture tightening as a flicker of uncertainty passed through him. It was not the presence of the SUV itself, it was the timing, the stillness, the way it had arrived without drawing attention until now. His radio crackled again, louder this time, a voice attempting to break through the static. But the words came distorted, fragmented, like something struggling to reach him before it was too late. Unit 7, stand by, do not. The message cut out abruptly, leaving only silence behind. Mitchell frowned, tapping the device as if that would restore control, but control was already slipping, not in a dramatic way, not yet, but in the quiet, almost invisible shift that happens right before everything changes. Danielle finally spoke again, her voice calm, steady, carrying just enough weight to settle into the air around them. "Officer," she said, and this time he looked directly at her, fully, for the first time since the stop began. "You might want to listen to that radio," she added, not as a warning, not as a threat, but as a fact, and something in the way she said it made the space between them feel different, like the rules had already changed and he was the only one who had not realized it yet. The radio in Officer Ryan Mitchell's hand crackled again, louder now, sharper, the static breaking apart just enough for fragments of urgency to slip through. "Unit 7, stand down immediately. Repeat, stand down." The voice cut in and out, distorted but unmistakably serious, and for the first time, Mitchell did not respond right away. His thumb hovered over the button, his confidence no longer as solid as it had been just minutes ago. He glanced at Danielle Carter, studying her face more carefully now, as if trying to find something he had missed, but she did not look different. She did not suddenly appear threatening or powerful. She simply stood there, calm, composed, as if everything unfolding was exactly where it was supposed to be, and that was what unsettled him, because nothing about this felt normal anymore. The SUV door behind them opened fully this time, slow and deliberate, the soft sound cutting through the tension like a signal, one that did not need to be loud to be understood. A man stepped out, tall, composed, dressed in a dark suit that did not draw attention, but somehow commanded it anyway. He did not rush, did not raise his voice. He simply walked forward with the kind of certainty that did not ask for permission, and the crowd felt it. The shift, the quiet pull of something changing. Phones tilted slightly to capture him now. Whispers faded into silence. Mitchell turned, fully this time, his body squaring toward the approaching figure, his posture tightening as he tried to re-establish control over a situation that was quietly slipping away. "This is an active stop," he called out, his voice firm but no longer as steady. "You need to step back." But the man did not stop. Not immediately. He closed the distance until he was just a few feet away, then reached calmly into his jacket and held up a badge, not aggressively, not dramatically, just enough for it to be seen, for it to be understood, the kind of identification that does not need explanation. Mitchell's eyes dropped to it for a second, then lifted again, his expression shifting, not into fear, not yet, but into something closer to confusion, something that did not fit into his expectations of how this moment was supposed to go. The man spoke then, his voice even, controlled, carrying a weight that did not rely on volume. "Officer Mitchell," he said, and hearing his name spoken like that, without introduction, without question, sent a quiet ripple through him. "You are going to remove those cuffs," the man continued, not as a suggestion, not as a request, but as a statement that assumed it would be followed. Mitchell hesitated, just for a second, his grip loosening slightly without him realizing it, his eyes flicking back to Danielle, and that was when he saw it. Not fear, not relief, but recognition. Like she had been waiting for this exact moment, like the pieces had finally aligned, and in that silence, heavy and undeniable, the truth began to surface, not all at once, not in a dramatic reveal, but in the slow, irreversible understanding that whatever this situation was, it was no longer his to control. For a moment, no one moved, not the crowd, not the man in the suit, not even the passing cars that seemed to slow as if the street itself was holding its breath. Officer Ryan Mitchell felt it then, that shift he could not name, the kind that does not come with noise but with absence, like something had quietly taken control without asking. His fingers hovered near the cuffs, his training telling him to stay firm, to stay in charge. But his instincts, the deeper ones he did not often listen to, were telling him something else entirely. Danielle Carter remained still, her posture unchanged, her gaze steady, not on him, not even on the man who had just arrived, but somewhere beyond both of them. As if this moment was only a step in something much larger, the man in the suit took one final step forward, closing the distance completely, his presence calm but absolute. "Officer," he said again, softer this time, but somehow more final. "This situation is now under federal oversight." The words landed without force, but they carried weight, the kind that did not need to be explained. Mitchell swallowed slightly, his jaw tightening as he glanced down at the badge again. This time longer, this time actually reading it. And when he did, the last pieces began to fall into place, not all at once, but enough to unsettle everything he thought he understood. I was conducting a lawful stop," he said, his voice no longer as sharp, no longer as certain, and, for the first time, it sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. The man did not argue, did not raise his voice. He simply held Mitchell's gaze and said, "And now you are going to correct it." A pause followed, heavy and quiet, stretching just long enough for the reality to settle in. The crowd across the street had gone completely silent, phones still raised but no longer moving, as if everyone sensed they were watching something shift beyond a simple traffic stop. Danielle finally turned her head slightly, just enough for Mitchell to see her eyes clearly, and in them, there was no anger, no triumph, only a calm certainty that made everything else feel smaller. "You should listen," she said quietly, echoing her earlier words. But this time they carried something more, not a warning, not even advice, but a truth that had already taken hold. Mitchell exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just a fraction, and with a movement that felt heavier than it should have. He reached for the cuffs, the metal loosened, the tension that had filled the air beginning to crack, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to signal that whatever this moment had been, it was no longer his to define. As the cuffs came free, Danielle did not step away immediately. She simply brought her hands forward, rubbing her wrists once, a small, human gesture that somehow grounded everything. The man in the suit nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and behind them, the SUV engine quieted, as if even it recognized that the moment it had arrived for had now begun to unfold. And standing there, in the fading glow of flashing lights, Mitchell realized something he could not ignore anymore. He had not just stopped a woman on a quiet street. He had stepped into something far beyond his understanding, and it was only just beginning to reveal itself. The moment the cuffs came off, the air did not relax. It shifted, like something invisible had just taken its rightful place. Danielle Carter lowered her hands slowly, not rushing, not reacting the way most people would after being restrained. Instead, she straightened her posture with quiet precision, as if resetting herself back to exactly where she was meant to stand. Officer Ryan Mitchell took a small step back without realizing it, his body creating distance before his mind fully caught up, his eyes moving between her and the man in the suit, searching for something solid to hold on to, some version of control he could still claim. But it was slipping, not dramatically, not all at once, just enough for him to feel it, like sand shifting under his feet. The man in the suit turned slightly toward Danielle, his tone respectful, measured. "Commander Carter," he said, and the title landed heavier than anything else that had been said so far. It did not echo, it did not need to. It simply existed, undeniable, and for a brief second, the world seemed to narrow around that single word. Mitchell blinked, his expression tightening as the meaning settled in, not fully, not completely, but enough to make his earlier assumptions feel dangerously incomplete. Danielle met the man's gaze with a small nod. Nothing exaggerated, nothing performative, just acknowledgement. As if this was routine, as if moments like this were part of a world most people never saw. "You are late," she said calmly, her voice even, carrying no frustration, only fact. The man allowed a faint exhale, almost a quiet admission. "Traffic," he replied, and for a split second, the normalcy of that exchange fell out of place against everything else unfolding. But that was the point. It was not chaos. It was control, just not his. Mitchell shifted again, his hand brushing against his radio, which remained silent now. Almost deliberately so, like it had said everything it needed to say already. The crowd across the street had stopped whispering altogether, their phones still raised but their movements slower, more cautious, as if they were beginning to understand they were witnessing something beyond a simple roadside stop. Danielle turned her attention back to Mitchell, not sharply, not confrontationally, but directly. And when their eyes met, there was no anger there, no need for it, only clarity. "Officer," she said, her tone steady, "do you know why silence feels so loud right now?" The question caught him off guard, not because of the words themselves, but because of how calmly they were delivered. He opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again, unsure how to respond, and that hesitation said more than any answer could have. Danielle continued, her voice low enough that only he and the man beside her could clearly hear. "Because everything you thought you understood just stopped making sense," she said. And the truth in that statement settled into him whether he wanted it to or not. The man in the suit stepped forward half a pace, his presence reinforcing the shift that had already taken place. "We will take it from here," he added, not dismissive, not hostile, just final. And for the first time since the lights had flashed on that quiet street, Mitchell did not respond immediately. He simply stood there, processing, recalibrating, realizing that this was not a moment he could talk his way out of, not one he could control through routine or authority. This was something else entirely, something that had been moving long before he arrived. And as Danielle Carter adjusted her sleeve and stepped forward with quiet confidence, it became clear to everyone watching that this was never her interruption, it was his. The street felt different now, not quieter, not louder, but heavier, like every second carried more weight than it should. Danielle Carter took a slow step forward, her movements precise, controlled, as if every motion had already been calculated long before this moment began. The man in the suit fell in a step beside her without needing direction, his presence no longer an interruption but an extension of something larger, something organized, something intentional. Officer Ryan Mitchell remained where he was, his body still facing them, but his authority no longer anchored in the space around him. His radio stayed silent in his hand, the absence of sound louder than any command he had given earlier, and for the first time that evening, he was not leading the situation, he was watching it unfold. Danielle stopped just a few feet from him, close enough for the flashing lights to reflect clearly in her eyes. And when she spoke again, her voice carried a calm that did not ask to be heard. It simply was. "There are moments," she said, "when a situation tells you exactly what it is, but you choose not to see it." Mitchell's jaw tightened slightly, not in defiance, but in recognition, because somewhere deep down, he knew that feeling, that quiet signal that something was off, something different, something that did not match the script he had been following. But he had ignored it, pushed past it, relied instead on habit, on assumption, on the comfort of believing he understood what was in front of him. Danielle continued, her gaze steady, never leaving his. "You had that moment," she added. And the words did not accuse, they revealed, and that made them harder to dismiss. The man beside her reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out a thin folder, nothing dramatic, nothing exaggerated, just a simple motion that carried quiet finality. He handed it toward Mitchell, who hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking it, his fingers slower now, more careful, as if the weight of what he held was not in the paper itself but in what it represented. He opened it, his eyes scanning the contents, lines of text, official markings, identifiers that did not belong to his department, did not follow his chain of command. And as he read, the last pieces began to settle into place, not with shock, not with sudden realization, but with a slow, undeniable understanding that this had never been a routine stop, never been a simple interaction. Danielle watched him, not with satisfaction, not with judgment, but with something quieter, something closer to patience, like she had seen this moment happen before, like she knew exactly how it would unfold. The crowd across the street remained frozen, their phones still raised, but now their silence carried a different tone, less curiosity, more awareness, like they could feel the shift even if they did not fully understand it. Mitchell closed the folder slowly, his hands no longer as steady. As before, his voice, when it came, was lower, stripped of the sharp edge it once had. "I did not have all the information," he said, and it was not a defense, not entirely. It was the closest thing to honesty he could offer in that moment. Danielle nodded once, acknowledging the statement without validating it. "That is exactly the point," she replied, and the simplicity of those words settled deeper than anything else that had been said, because in that moment, standing under flashing lights that no longer felt like his, Mitchell understood something he could not ignore. Authority without understanding is not control, it is risk, and tonight, he had stepped directly into it without realizing what he was really facing. The silence did not break. It deepened, stretching across the street like an invisible line no one wanted to cross. Danielle Carter stood steady, her presence no longer just calm but anchored, like everything around her had begun to align with a reality that had been hidden moments ago. Officer Ryan Mitchell remained still, the folder now closed in his hands, its contents no longer just information but context. And context was something he had not had when this began, something he now realized. He should have questioned before acting. The flashing lights from his cruiser continued to pulse, but they felt distant now, like they belonged to a different moment, a different version of control that no longer applied. Danielle took another step forward, not toward him, but past him, and that movement alone said everything. She was not waiting for permission, not looking for resolution. She was continuing. Because whatever this had been for him, it was only a pause for her. The man in the suit followed, his eyes briefly scanning the perimeter, the crowd, the vehicles, the details most people overlooked, and then returning to her, always to her, as if she remained the center of something larger than anyone present could fully see. Mitchell turned slightly, watching her pass, and for a second, instinct told him to say something, to regain some part of the authority he had lost. But the words did not come, because there was nothing left to assert, nothing left to correct in the way he was used to. Instead, he heard his own voice from earlier, the assumptions, the tone, the certainty that now felt misplaced, and that echo stayed with him longer than any command could have. Danielle stopped near the SUV, the door already open, waiting, the interior dark but controlled, like the vehicle itself was less transportation and more extension of an operation already in motion. She placed a hand lightly on the edge of the door, then paused, not out of hesitation, but intention. She turned her head just enough to look back at Mitchell one last time, not fully, just enough for him to feel it. And in that brief glance, there was no anger, no triumph, only clarity, the kind that does not need to prove anything. "Next time," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough to reach him. "Do not assume the story ends where you think it begins." The words settled into the space between them, not as a warning, but as a truth he would not forget. Mitchell did not respond, not because he could not, but because he understood that this was not a moment for response. It was a moment for realization. The man in the suit gave a small nod toward Danielle, then glanced once more at Mitchell, not with hostility, not even with judgment, but with the kind of look that comes from seeing something play out exactly as expected. The SUV engine hummed slightly louder as Danielle stepped inside, the door closing with a soft, controlled sound, the kind that marks an ending without needing to announce it. The vehicle remained still for a second longer, just enough for the moment to settle completely. And then it began to move, pulling away from the curb with quiet precision, merging back into the flow of the street as if it had never interrupted it at all. The flashing lights reflected briefly across its surface, then faded, leaving Mitchell standing alone in the space where control had once felt certain. The crowd slowly began to move again, whispers returning, phones lowering, the world resuming its rhythm. But for him, something had shifted, something that would not reset with the end of a shift or the turn of a key, because this had not just been a stop, it had been a moment where everything he thought he understood was quietly, completely rewritten. The street returned to motion, but not for him. Officer Ryan Mitchell stood beside his cruiser as the flashing lights continued their rhythm, red then blue then red again. But now each pulse felt like a reminder instead of a signal. The black SUV had already disappeared down the road, blending into traffic as if it had never been there. Yet its presence lingered in the air, in his thoughts, in the quiet space where certainty used to sit. He looked down at the folder still in his hand. The edges slightly bent from the way he had been holding it, tighter than he realized. He opened it again, slower this time, reading the same lines, the same identifiers, but now with a different understanding, not just seeing the words but feeling their weight. The kind of weight that does not come from rank alone, but from access, from clearance, from a world that operates parallel to his, but far beyond it. A car passed by, its headlights sweeping briefly across him before continuing on. And for a moment he imagined how it must have looked from the outside. Just another stop, just another officer doing his job. But that was the illusion, the version of events that only exists when you do not know the full story. And now he did, or at least enough to know how much he had missed. His radio crackled again, clear this time, no distortion, no delay. Unit 7, confirm status. The voice asked, calm, routine, as if nothing unusual had happened. Mitchell lifted the radio slowly, his thumb pressing the button with less certainty than before. Status resolved. He replied, his voice steady but quieter. Stripped of the edge it carried earlier, there was a pause on the other end, just long enough to suggest that something had been noted, something had been logged. Then the response came back, simple, neutral, copy that, and the line went silent again. He lowered the radio, exhaling a breath he did not realize he had been holding. Across the street, the last of the crowd began to disperse, people returning to their routines, their conversations already shifting to other things, but a few lingered just long enough to glance back at him, not with accusation, not even with judgment, but with curiosity, the kind that comes from sensing that something had happened without fully understanding what it was. Mitchell moved back toward his cruiser, each step slower, more deliberate, like he was walking through something he could not see but could still feel. He reached the driver's side door and paused, his hand resting on the handle, his reflection faintly visible in the window. And for a moment, he did not recognize the expression looking back at him, not because it was unfamiliar, but because it was unguarded, the certainty gone, replaced by something quieter, something closer to awareness. He glanced once more down the road where the SUV had disappeared, the lights, the movement, the normalcy of the street now fully restored. But the moment had not reset. It had settled, embedded itself into the space between action and understanding. And as he finally opened the door and slid into the driver's seat, the engine humming back to life beneath him, he realized something that would stay long after this shift ended. Not every situation announces what it truly is, and the ones that do, not are the ones that change you the most. The engine of the cruiser idled beneath Officer Ryan Mitchell as he sat there for a moment longer than necessary, his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, not gripping it, just holding it as if he needed something solid to anchor himself. The flashing lights still reflected faintly off nearby windows, but he had not turned them off yet, almost as if part of him was not ready to let go of the version of the moment they represented. He finally reached forward and flipped the switch, and just like that, the street changed. The red and blue glow vanished, replaced by ordinary streetlights and passing headlights. The illusion of authority fading into something quieter, something more real. He exhaled slowly and pulled away from the curb, merging back into traffic. But the drive did not feel routine anymore. Every passing car, every pedestrian, every shadow seemed sharper, more defined, as if his awareness had shifted in a way he could not reverse. A few blocks down, he stopped at a red light, the steady glow of it reflecting across his windshield. And for a brief moment, everything was still again, not tense, not heavy, just still. And in that stillness, his mind replayed the scene, not the commands, not the actions, but the details he had overlooked, the calm in Danielle Carter's voice, the way she had not reacted, the timing of the SUV, the radio message he had almost ignored, all the small signals that had been there from the beginning, signals he had chosen not to see because they did not fit the narrative he had already decided on. The light turned green, but he did not move immediately. The car behind him gave a soft honk, pulling him back to the present. He pressed the gas and continued forward, but the thought stayed with him. How many times had he done that before? How many times had he filled in the gaps with assumption instead of observation? The road stretched ahead, familiar, but somehow different, like he was seeing it through a lens he had not used before. He reached for the radio again, not out of necessity, but out of habit, then paused. his hand hovering just above it before pulling back. The silence felt more honest now, less like something missing and more like something earned. As he drove, the city moved around him in its usual rhythm, people crossing streets, storefronts glowing under warm lights, life continuing without pause. But for him, something had shifted beneath that surface, something quieter but more lasting. He passed the intersection where it had all begun, the spot already empty. No trace of what had happened there just minutes ago. And that was the part that stayed with him the most. How quickly something significant could disappear from the outside while remaining completely present on the inside. He slowed slightly, his eyes lingering on the curb where Danielle had stood, where he had stood, where everything had changed without raising its voice. And as he continued driving, blending back into the flow of the city, one thought settled deeper than the rest. Not every mistake announces itself in the moment it happens. Sometimes it reveals itself only after everything has moved on, and by then, the only thing left to do is decide what you do with what you have finally seen. The city stretched out in front of Officer Ryan Mitchell as the miles passed beneath his tires, but distance did not quiet the moment. It sharpened it, every detail replaying with a clarity that refused to fade. He turned onto a quieter street, one lined with closed storefronts and dim overhead lights, the kind of place where the noise of the city softened just enough for thoughts to become louder. And that was where it caught up to him, not the event itself, but what it meant, the way everything had unfolded without force, without escalation, just a quiet, controlled shift that left him standing on the outside of something he did not understand. He slowed near a stop sign, the empty intersection stretching out before him, and for a moment he just sat there, engine humming, hands resting lightly on the wheel, his reflection faint in the windshield, and he asked himself a question he had not asked in a long time. Not on duty, not in uniform. What did I miss? The answer did not come all at once. It never does. It arrived in fragments, in small realizations that connected. Slowly, the calm in her voice, the way she had not reacted, the timing of everything around her, the confidence that did not need to prove itself. All signs that something was different, something he should have recognized, but did not, because he had already decided what the situation was before it had the chance to reveal itself. He exhaled and leaned back slightly in his seat, the weight of that realization settling deeper. Not as guilt, not exactly, but as awareness, the kind that does not leave once it arrives. He turned the wheel and continued driving, the road curving gently as the city lights shifted around him. And for the first time that night, he began to see the pattern, not just in what had happened, but in how it had happened, the silence, the patience, the control that did not need to be loud to be absolute. It was not about power in the way he understood it. It was something else, something quieter, something that waited until the moment it needed to be seen. He reached the edge of his patrol zone and slowed again, his radio remaining silent beside him. No new calls, no interruptions, just space. And in that space, the thought settled fully. Authority is not just about what you can do. It is about what you understand before you act. He pulled over briefly, the cruiser coming to a stop beneath a streetlight that cast a soft glow across the hood. And for a second, everything was still again. But this time it was different, not tense, not uncertain, just clear. He looked out through the windshield, the road ahead open, familiar, but no longer taken for granted. And as he sat there, one final realization settled into place, quiet but undeniable. Not every lesson is taught through force. Some are delivered in silence, in moments where everything you thought you knew is gently, completely undone. And it is what you do after that moment that defines who you are when the lights are no longer flashing. The cruiser remained parked beneath the streetlight for a few seconds longer, the soft glow stretching across the hood like a quiet pause the world had offered him. Officer Ryan Mitchell sat still, his hands no longer on the wheel, but resting loosely in his lap. And for the first time that night, there was no urgency pulling at him, no call demanding action, just space. And in that space, something unfamiliar settled in. Not doubt, not hesitation, but awareness, the kind that does not rush, that does not demand immediate answers. It simply exists until you are ready to see it clearly. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. But he was not really looking at it. He was looking through it, replaying not just what had happened, but how it had unfolded, the silence, the control, the way Danielle Carter had never once tried to prove anything, because she did not need to, and that realization shifted something deeper inside him, something that training alone had never touched. He reached up and adjusted the rearview mirror slightly, his own reflection coming into clearer view, and for a moment, he studied it, not critically, not defensively, just honestly. And what he saw was not the officer from earlier that evening, the one who had approached with certainty and assumption. This version was quieter, more measured, like something had been stripped away to reveal what had always been underneath. He sat back again, exhaling slowly, the sound almost lost in the stillness of the car, and then, without thinking too much about it, he reached for the radio, not to respond, not to assert control, but to listen. He turned the volume slightly higher, letting the low hum of dispatch chatter fill the space, not as noise, but as grounding, a reminder of the system he was still part of, but now saw differently. A call came through for another unit, routine, straightforward, the kind of situation he would normally step into without a second thought. And as he listened, he noticed something he had never paid attention to before, the pauses, the tone, the subtle shifts in voice that carried more information than the words themselves. Details he had overlooked because he had always been focused on acting quickly, decisively. But now, he understood something else, that sometimes the most important part of a situation is not what is said, but what is not. He reached forward and turned off the radio again, the silence returning, but it no longer felt empty. It felt intentional, like a choice. He placed both hands back on the wheel and sat there for one more second, just enough to feel the weight of the moment settle completely. And then he nodded, once, to himself, not as a gesture of certainty, but of acknowledgement, that something had changed, something that would not fade with time or routine. He started the engine fully and pulled back onto the road, the tires rolling forward with a steady, controlled motion. And as the cruiser moved under the dim streetlights, blending once again into the rhythm of the city, one thought remained clear, steady, and undeniable. The badge may give you authority, but it is awareness that determines how you use it. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, he had begun to understand the difference. The cruiser moved steadily through the city, its tires humming against the asphalt as Officer Ryan Mitchell followed the familiar grid of streets that had once felt predictable, controllable, routine. But tonight, every turn felt slightly different, not because the roads had changed, but because he had, the streetlights, passed overhead in measured intervals, casting brief shadows across his windshield. And in those moments of light and dark, his thoughts continued to settle into something clearer, something more grounded. He was no longer replaying the moment as a mistake alone. He was beginning to see it as a turning point, not the kind that announces itself with noise or consequence, but the kind that shifts how you move forward without needing to say it out loud. He slowed as he approached another intersection, the traffic light glowing yellow before turning red, and he came to a stop, his hands steady on the wheel, his posture more relaxed now, not because the weight of what happened had disappeared, but because he was no longer resisting it. He was allowing it to become part of how he understood the job. A pedestrian crossed in front of him, walking at a calm, unhurried pace, and for a moment, Mitchell watched, not out of suspicion, not out of habit, but simply observing, noticing the small details he would have overlooked before. The way the person glanced both ways, the rhythm of their steps, the quiet confidence of someone moving through their own routine without interruption. And it struck him how easy it was to misread a moment when you only saw what you expected to see. The light turned green, but he waited a second longer than necessary, letting the space remain just a little longer, then eased forward. The cruiser gliding smoothly into motion, his radio remained silent beside him. But this time, it did not feel like something missing. It felt like something intentional, like a reminder that not every moment needs to be filled with action. Sometimes it needs to be understood first. He turned down a wider avenue, the city opening up slightly, buildings taller, lights brighter, life moving in steady patterns all around him. And as he drove, he noticed something else, a subtle shift in how he carried himself, his grip lighter, his gaze more deliberate, his awareness no longer scattered but focused, like he was no longer trying to control everything at once, but instead choosing where to place his attention, where to apply his authority. and where to hold back. The memory of Danielle Carter did not fade. It settled, not as a confrontation, not as a challenge, but as a reference point, a quiet reminder of what happens when you act without full understanding, and more importantly, what it looks like when someone operates with a level of control that does not need to be proven. He passed another patrol unit heading in the opposite direction, their lights off, their presence routine. And for a moment, he wondered how many of them had experienced something like this, a moment that quietly reshaped the way they saw everything, or how many had missed it entirely, never realizing the shift was there to begin with. He continued driving, the city stretching out ahead, unchanged on the surface, but for him, no longer the same, because now, every interaction, every stop, every decision would carry something new, not hesitation, not fear, but awareness. The kind that listens before it acts, that observes before it assumes. And as the cruiser moved steadily through the night, one thought settled fully into place, calm, clear, and impossible to ignore. Real authority is not about being the loudest presence in the moment. It is about knowing when to pause, when to see, and when to understand what is truly in front of you before you decide what comes next. The night carried on like it always did, steady and indifferent, the city lights stretching into the distance as Officer Ryan Mitchell's cruiser moved through the streets with a quiet consistency that no longer felt automatic. Every turn, every stop, every passing moment now held a clarity that had not been there before, not because the world had changed, but because he had finally slowed down enough to see it, really see it. Not just the surface, not just the routine, but the layers beneath it. The details that speak without words. The signals that exist long before anything is said out loud. He passed by another intersection, the glow of the traffic lights reflecting across his windshield. And this time, when the light turned yellow, he did not rush it. He eased to a stop, letting the moment settle, letting the space exist without needing to fill it. And in that stillness, he understood something that had been building all night, something that no training manual had ever fully explained. That control is not proven in how quickly you act, but in how clearly you understand before you do. A car pulled up beside him, the driver glancing over briefly before looking forward again, unaware of anything beyond their own path. And that was the truth of it. Most moments pass without meaning to anyone else. But for the person inside them, they can change everything. The light turned green, and he moved forward, not faster, not slower, just steady. His hands relaxed on the wheel, his eyes focused but not tense, his awareness no longer scattered but intentional. He turned onto a quieter road, the kind that did not demand attention but rewarded it. And as he drove, the memory of Danielle Carter did not replay as a mistake anymore. It settled as something else entirely. A line drawn between who he was before that moment and who he chose to be after it, not defined by authority alone, not defined by reaction, but by awareness, by the willingness to pause, to observe, to question before deciding what something is. The road ahead remained open, the city continuing its rhythm without pause. And as he followed it, one final understanding settled into place, not loud, not dramatic, but steady and undeniable. The badge may give you the power to act, but it is the ability to see clearly that determines whether that action becomes justice or just another moment. Misunderstood. And somewhere out there, beyond the reach of his patrol, Danielle Carter continued forward as well, unseen, unknown to most, exactly where she was meant to be, while he remained here, driving through the same streets, carrying something new that would shape every step he took from this point on. Because in the end, he had not just encountered someone he did not understand, he had encountered a truth he could not ignore. That power does not always announce itself, and the people who carry it rarely need to.